General Hospital spoilers tease that one of the new disasters brewing in Port Charles is the dangerous deterioration of Alexis and Rick's relationship, a bond built on years of legal battles, overlapping personal histories, and a once viable bond that's now falling apart into sharp, jagged pieces as a result of troubling changes. The new story of fabricated secrets, unethical deals made behind closed doors, and bargaining based on fear rather than reason is showing a crazy adjustment in how both Alexis and Rick see themselves and each other. In particular, Christina's near-death experience of Rick and Elizabeth by cutting the brakes on what she mistakenly thought was Ava's car is a turning point that not only sparks a personal crisis, but also ignites a hidden war between Rick and Alexis, one that no longer abides by any moral code. Rick, once sidelined from important family decisions, now returns with a new power. The ability to manipulate Alexis through her own fear. The moment he realizes that Alexis is willing to spend money, destroy her reputation, and even go against the principles that once defined her just to protect Christina, that's when Rick decides to use it all. No longer feeling pity, no longer needing forgiveness. Rick is now completely clear-headed when facing Alexis, and he chooses to take revenge in the most brutal way, making her see herself broken, shattered, and distorted by her wrong choice. Alexis, once strong, decisive, always living by justice and morality, is now at an irreversible crossroads. She cannot expose Christina without losing her daughter. She cannot expose Ava without leaving an indelible stain. And she can't confront Rick, who's taking advantage of her by sitting back, watching, and smiling as her values crumble bit by bit. In that suffocating situation, the tacit adjustments between the two are pushing the situation to a new limit, a complete distortion of right and wrong, victim and mastermind. This shift is more than just a legal confrontation or a personal clash. It's a sign that Port Charles is entering a darker era, where truth is a commodity, justice is a luxury. And the deepest hurt comes from those who once loved and shared a home. If Rick continues to push Alexis to the brink, if Ava continues to hold the bargaining chip, if Christina isn't forced to confront the truth, the price will be more than a few $1 million or a ruined career. It will be the souls of a generation of people who once stood at the moral center of this city. And when this nightmare explodes into a full-blown disaster, no one will escape the consequences. Not Alexis, who is losing her identity. Not Rick, who is using his anger as a tool. Not Ava, who is satisfied with money and power. And not Christina, who has unwittingly become the source of a chain reaction of irreversible damage. The tide is rising. And Port Charles is trembling with the realization that some things, once broken, can never be mended. Rick is slowly realizing the level of chaos and haunting desperation that is quietly growing inside Alexis, a woman who once appeared strong, rational, and considered the moral compass of Port Charles, but is now losing everything to protect one thing, Christina. In Rick's eyes, what Alexis is doing is not just a mother's reaction to keep her daughter out of trouble, but an expression of a primal, wild fear, a fear that if the truth is exposed, everything she has worked so hard to preserve throughout her life, her personal honor, her legal career, her role as a mother, will crumble before her eyes. And that, exactly, is what Rick is waiting to crush. Alexis's every move, from compromising with Ava to silently accepting the manipulations of people she once despised, is proving something Rick knows better than anyone. Alexis is no longer herself. She was pushed into a spiral of guilt, where she began to do things that were contrary to the principles she had once criticized others for. It was in that inner conflict that Rick saw a fatal weakness, and nothing satisfied him more than watching Alexis squirm in the moral trap she had set for herself. For Rick, this was no longer a legal dispute, a custody battle, or any other form of family conflict. This was revenge. Not the kind of revenge that erupted in anger, but a plan that was coldly hatched. Ruthlessly and calculatedly, drawn out step by step, as carefully as a play with a predetermined outcome. And in that play, Alexis was the main character, a character who would fall not because of an external attack, but because she was suffocated by the principles she had once considered inviolable. Rick no longer cared who was right or wrong. What he needed now was Alexis's downfall, emotionally, honorably, and, if possible, legally. He wanted the entire town of Port Charles to see the woman who once stood tall for justice silenced about her daughter, forced to pay for her silence, and worse, forced to bow to people like Ava, whom she had denounced as immoral. To Rick, that was justice, a twisted justice, built on the hurt he had swallowed over the years. And the more Alexis tried to hide, the deeper she fell into the trap Rick was setting. She thought she could keep things intact with money, silence, and compromise. But she didn't realize that those very actions were creating cracks in her image, a crack that Rick was slowly amplifying in public. He knew the time had not come. He knows he has to wait until Alexis is at her weakest, when Christina herself begins to doubt her mother. That's when the final blow will come. This revenge won't be personal. It will spread into a chain of events that will shake the moral foundations of Port Charles, which once hailed Alexis as a strong, steadfast woman. When the truth about the break-cutting comes out, when Ava's hidden actions come to light, and when the amount of money Alexis spent to buy her silence is revealed, everything will fall like a castle built on sand. And as it all falls apart, Rick will stand, not as a triumphant victor, but as a man finally hearing the apology he never received. Port Charles is being dragged into a slow, simmering nightmare. And Alexis, a former champion of justice, is falling victim to a dark version of justice, crafted by Rick with a lifetime of pent-up anger, hurt, and bitterness. When the truth comes out, no one will escape the consequences, not Alexis, not Christina, not Ava, and certainly, none of them will be left unscathed. Rick finds himself at the center of a dark spiral as his new machinations with Ava spiral out of control. Opening a new chapter in the Port Charles drama, a dark chapter where death can be used as a tool of punishment, and those once considered outsiders now control the fate of others. With each careful, calculated move, Rick is quietly setting up a brutal scenario where Alexis, the woman who was once his lover, the mother of his daughter, and his sworn enemy in the moral war, becomes the ultimate target, an obstacle to be eliminated forever. Alexis was once a symbol of reason, of the law, of standards. But in Rick's eyes, she is now nothing more than a stain he wants to erase from the world. The times Alexis chose to protect Christina instead of speaking up for what was right, the times she ignored the truth, the times she misplaced her trust, all of it had built up inside Rick like an undercurrent. He didn't just want to see her fail. He wanted to see her fall apart, with no one to call her name, no place to turn. And if that could only be achieved through an end as extreme as death, then Rick was ready to do the most taboo thing, turn Alexis into a memory. But Rick wasn't doing it alone. Ava, who had once fought Alexis, who had once been humiliated by her, who had been pushed to the brink of vulnerability, had now become an ideal pawn, or worse, an invisible ally. The brief conversations, the knowing glances, the unspoken agreements were making the bond between Rick and Ava increasingly dangerous. Both have their own agendas. But what makes them alike is that they no longer believe in the law, no longer expect justice. They act on emotion, on hatred, and on a single logic: if others don't fall, they can't rise. If Alexis dies, in a carefully calculated accident, a death that leaves no trace, or a situation designed to look like a self-inflicted act, Port Charles will lose more than just a lawyer, a mother, a strong woman. The city will lose its last moral pillar, the one who once had the courage to stand up and speak truth to wolves. That loss will leave a void that no one can fill. Because Alexis is not someone who can be easily replaced, she is a symbol, and when that symbol falls, so will Port Charles's entire belief system. Christina, the daughter Alexis sacrificed everything to protect, will be pushed into a dark abyss with no way out. She will live her life knowing she was indirectly responsible for her mother's death. Ava will never escape the wrath of her conscience if she actually contributed to the tragedy. And Rick, no matter how hard he tries to hide it, will never be able to wash the blood off his hands, because at some point, however late, justice will come back to him, in whatever form it takes. The disaster that is quietly brewing is not a loud explosion, but a slow erosion of reason, trust, and humanity. What seemed like a small adjustment in relationships is now a moral deathblow. Where Alexis's death, if it happens, will set off a chain reaction that will spiral out of control. And when it all falls apart, when the last light goes out, all that remains is darkness. And the lingering echo of a chilling truth: sometimes, people don't kill with guns or knives, but with calculations, lies, and hatred that goes too long to be resolved. Port Charles will no longer be a place of second chances. If Rick goes all the way with this scheme, if Ava blindly agrees, if Alexis doesn't see the darkness that surrounds her, then a new dark chapter will begin, a chapter of blood, of guilt, and of souls that will never rest. Molly is at a point where everything seems to be falling apart faster than she can keep up. For someone who once prided herself on her reason, her principles, and her belief in the truth, she never imagined that her own family would become a battlefield of uncontrollable intrigue, betrayal, and hatred. The people she loves, from her mother, Alexis, to her father, Rick, are being swept up in events so crazy that Port Charles feels alien to everything she once knew. And now, as Molly watches each relationship implode, her own trust is being irreparably damaged. A series of silent but brutal attacks have come one after another, from Christina's accident, to Alexis's secrets, to Rick's dangerous coldness and calculation. Molly, who has always believed that no matter how much family discord there is, there can at least be a common moral foundation, is now in a state of extreme conflict. Every time she tries to protect one, she turns her back on the other, and it is tearing her heart apart in the most brutal way. The new madness lies not only in the actions of individuals but in the gradual deformation of the family structure that Molly once believed in. She no longer knows who to trust, which side to take. When each person has their own reasons, their own past, and their own pain that they hide behind bad decisions. And amid these storms, the relationship between Rick and Molly, once fragile but still respectful, is now being tested beyond endurance. Rick, with his increasingly calculating ways, is making it impossible for Molly to distinguish between the father she tried to understand and the one who is plotting to destroy her own family. Molly can't accept that her father could be involved in manipulation, even violence, but the signs are giving her no reason to deny it. The painful realization that the man she once called her father may have crossed the line too far to turn back is sending her spiraling into a spiral of inner tension where every decision leads to loss. The adjustment that's taking place inside Molly isn't a gentle one. It's a complete shattering of trust, a moment when one must accept that home is no longer a safe haven, but a place where all wounds begin. And as the madness continues to unfold, as lies become routine, Molly may be the first to be forced to make the unthinkable choice, to leave everything behind to save herself. Rick and Molly's relationship, once a small hope of reconnecting two people from two different worlds, is now in danger of being destroyed in a storm. There are no more intimate conversations, no more sharing and trying to heal. Between them is a wall of silence, disappointment, and fear, where the slightest word could ignite an uncontrollable emotional explosion. Molly doesn't want to lose her father, but she also can't stand by and watch him become part of a nightmare that's destroying her family. Port Charles has never been colder to Molly. And when all that madness comes to a head, she'll be forced to do the thing she hates most, pick a side, accept the hurt, and move on, even if no one else is standing by her side. Christina is losing herself in the chaos of events that she can no longer control, as everything around her, from her family, her relationships, to the beliefs that once served as her spiritual foundation, is crumbling layer by layer without mercy. From a young woman who tried to build her life with willpower and faith in goodness, Christina is now caught in a spiral of hasty decisions, emotional actions, and especially the illusion that she can fix everything by interfering in everything. But that very intervention is opening up a chain of unforeseen consequences, leading to a series of crazy events that she is unwittingly at the center of. She begins to make rebellious choices, sometimes regardless of the consequences, in a desperate attempt to prove that she still has value, that she still has a voice in a family where everyone is busy dealing with their own dramas. But Christina doesn't realize that the more she tries to control the situation, the more she's lost her way. Her impulsive behavior, her irrational rebellion, And the relationships she's trying to maintain while her trust is fraying, all of it is creating a new shockwave. She's no longer a bystander, but a trigger. A fulcrum for extreme actions that could shatter the fragile structures around her. Meanwhile, what Rick and Ava are doing behind the scenes is brewing into a real disaster. Rick, with his personal ambitions hidden behind a veneer of sanctimoniousness, is no longer the man who once championed the cause of justice. He's now the embodiment of time-honored anger, a quiet rage looking for a place to explode. Ava, meanwhile, has never been one to stand on the sidelines. She's quick, sharp, and always knows how to strike at the weakest point. And now, that weakness is Christina, a young woman who can no longer distinguish between who is truly protecting her and who is using her as a political pawn. Rick doesn't need to speak up. Ava doesn't need to act openly. Just a few whispers, a few chance meetings, a few documents placed in the right place at the right time, are enough for them to turn Christina into a troublemaker. A tool leading to the downfall of Alexis, and even the entire Davis family. And the scariest thing is, Christina is unwittingly moving in the right direction, the more impulsive she acts. The more contradictory her words, the more she loses the trust of her loved ones, the easier she becomes to control. One of the biggest shocks that is quietly forming is not that Christina is being dragged into this trouble, but that she herself will become the indirect cause of a series of tragic events, including the possibility that Alexis will lose her life, if Rick and Ava's crazy plan comes to fruition. The new balance of power in Port Charles is no longer in the hands of those who were once considered the pillars, but in the hands of the silent conspirators. Quietly controlling and manipulating the situation from behind the scenes. And when a disoriented Christina becomes the key to those conspiracies, the entire city will pay the price. The pressure on Christina is increasing. She feels isolated, judged, abandoned, not by outside enemies, but by those closest to her. Every conversation with Alexis is now more tense. Every suspicious look from Molly, from Sam, from those who were once by her side now becomes a cold knife, cutting deep into Christina's already damaged self-esteem. She begins to doubt herself. To doubt whether she is a burden, the cause of all the trouble. And when someone like Christina begins to lose faith in herself, no moral limit, no rational principle will stop her. Port Charles is sitting on a keg of gunpowder, and Christina is holding the tinderbox in her hands. Rick and Ava stand nearby, not doing anything. Just waiting for the right moment to explode so they can reap the rewards. But if someone doesn't intervene, if no one is willing to expose the dark forces, if no one arrives in time to pull Christina back from the edge, the consequences will be more than shock. They will be catastrophic. A catastrophe of trust betrayed, friendship taken advantage of, and a young soul destroyed before it can know what true happiness is. Rick is unleashing a new wave of turmoil in Port Charles, no longer the quiet, old torment of a man once left behind, but a dark, cold, and predatory eruption of power. Rick has long lived in the shadow of big names like Sonny, his half-brother, who, despite their differences, has always been an untouchable figure in the city. But now that Sonny has died suddenly and mysteriously in a Los Angeles hospital, poisoned in a case that all the evidence seems too coincidental to be accidental, Rick sees a power vacuum that he can fill. And this time, he has no intention of remaining an observer. Sonny's death, though not officially a murder, has opened the door for those once overlooked to step into the center of the game. Rick is not the type to act hastily, but when he does, every move he makes is considered with every breath. And Ava, the woman who knows what it means to survive in the shadows, is the one Rick has chosen to help transform that honest world full of lies into a new playground, where there is no mercy, no rules, only power, information, and cruelty covered by a polite smile. The new story Rick is creating is no longer about lawsuits, legal disputes, or the manipulation of a few small lives. This time, he is redefining his role in Port Charles, no longer a forgotten name, but the man behind all the turmoil that is quietly sweeping the city. Rick's actions now take on a restructuring character, from quietly luring back the opportunists who once hid, to manipulating Christina's emotions, destroying Alexis's image, and at the same time tightening the connection with Ava with a series of mutual benefits, both material and strategic. Sonny's death is not only a personal loss, but a hidden political shock in the heart of Port Charles. While many people are grieving, confused, and have not yet accepted the truth, Rick acts. He changes his approach, no longer leaving traces, no longer directly confronting, but turning himself into a silent controller, a strategist in the shadows. Ava, who has survived countless tragedies, also understands that if she just gets in step with Rick, she can regain everything she has lost, including power and a voice in the world she was once excluded from. And the truth is, both Rick and Ava are no longer people who just want to survive. They want to rule. They want to rewrite the rules. And Sonny's death, if it is indeed the result of a plan, is the first step in that game. Step by step, they are changing the fabric of this city. Weakening the families that support it, dividing trust, sowing doubt, and especially obscuring the figures who once held the line of morality and justice. By pushing Alexis into a corner, controlling Christina, disorienting Molly, and severing Sonny's ties to the remaining loyalties, Rick and Ava are turning Port Charles into a place where power belongs only to those who are willing to pay their souls for it. The question is no longer whether Rick can become the central figure in the new picture of Port Charles, but, will anyone be sane enough to see through his plan before it's too late? Because if not, this city will soon no longer recognize itself. A place once built on hope, love, and loyalty, will now be nothing more than a battlefield where darkness reigns. And Rick Lansing is the ruler in the mask of a reasonable man.